All right, welcome back, everyone. Second to last week in the quarter. And this week we are going to talk about linear functions in standard form. So everything we've talked about so far has been in slope-intercept form, which is y equals mx plus b. And you can see that here where it says y equals mx plus b. But there's this other form that we're going to use quite a bit, and it's called standard form. And I'm going to highlight that in a different color here. So standard form is ax plus by equals c. And you might be confused by the letters, the capital A, the capital B, the capital C, but they are just numbers of some sort. They don't have to be any specific number, they're just any number. So we'll replace those the A, B, and C with numbers to create an equation in standard form. So if we look at this first little example here, we have four different equations, and we simply just have to circle the ones that are in slope-intercept form, or y equals mx plus b, and then put a box around the ones that are in standard form, which is ax plus by equals c. So if I look for slope-intercept form, I always want to look for a y equals, and I can see that in the first one, and then I see an x term, 3/4 x, and then minus 10. So that's y equals mx plus b. So I'm going to circle that. And the second one, I'm going to notice right away I have the x and the y on the left-hand side, and that should throw a big clue to me that says standard form. Now you're going to notice something. In the standard form equation, it says plus ax plus by equals c, and this one is 5x minus 2y equals 20. That's okay. The plus sign in standard form can be plus or minus. So I'm going to go ahead and put a box around that one because it is in standard form. The next one, very similar. Again, I'm going to notice that the x and y are on the left-hand side, just a number on the right-hand side. So that one is standard form as well. And then the last one, I'm going to notice a y equals, and then all I have to do is make sure that there's an x term followed by just a plain number, and I do have that, so I'm going to circle that one. Okay, so the first and last ones are slope-intercept form, and the middle two are in standard form. Now you might be wondering, what's the point of standard form? Well, we can graph an equation using standard form, and it's maybe a little bit simpler method for graphing because we only have to find two things in order to be able to graph the equation. One is we have to find the x-intercept, or where the line crosses the x-axis, and also the y-intercept. And that's the point where the line crosses the y-axis. So if I can find those two things, then I can easily graph a line by plotting those 2 points. Okay, so how do you calculate an x-intercept? Well, the easiest way to calculate an x-intercept is to make y equal 0. So I'm just going to plug in a 0 for y into my equation. And then the easiest way to find the y-intercept is to make x 0. So to find the y-intercept, I'm going to plug in an x equals 0. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to do this. So if I want to find the x-intercept, I'm going to start with that. I'm going to plug in y equals 0. Now, one thing we can do to make our life a little easier is create a table. And this table has x and y values in it. And those x and y values are the same as points. So the two that are right next to each other are just like a point. And so if I'm going to make the y equal 0 in one point, I'm going to put a 0 in the y column right here. Okay, and then all I have to do is find the x value that goes here. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to plug in y equals 0 into my equation. So my equation is negative 3x plus 5y equals 90. So if I plug in y equals 0, whoops, I don't want to write the y, I want to write a 0. All right, so I plugged in 0. So what you can see happens when you plug in 0 is the y term simply disappears because 5 times 0 is 0. So this y term just disappears. So all I have to do is solve negative 3x equals 90. So all I have to do is divide by negative 3. and I end up with x is equal to negative 30. So I'm going to put a negative 30 over here. So my x-intercept is negative 30 comma 0. All right, and then for the y-intercept, it says make x equal 0. So in this case, I'm going to put a 0 in the x column. And now all I have to do is find the y value that goes with it. So I'm going to plug in 0 for x. So I have negative 3 times 0 plus 5y equals 90. Okay, so again, when I plug in that 0 for x, that x term just simply disappears. And all I have to do is solve for 5y equals 90. So I'm just going to divide by 5. So y is equal to 18. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and plug in 18 into my table. All right, so I have an x-intercept that is negative 30, 0, and a y-intercept that is 0, 18. And so all I have to do now is plot those 2 points. So remember, the first one, the negative 30, was my x-intercept. So that means that negative 30, we're going to plot that point on the x-axis. So I'm going to zoom in here so we can all see that. And I just made a point right there. All right, so that's my x-intercept, negative 30, 0. So I'm just going to go ahead and add that here, negative 30, 0. All right, and then the y-intercept is 0, 18. So I'm going to find 18 on the y-axis and make a point there. And so that is my y-intercept of 0, 18. And now all I have to do is connect the dots. Well, this is not going to be a whole lot of fun because they are a long ways apart, but we'll try. We'll see what we can do. Look at that. Now, I kind of missed the x-intercept, but that's okay. I'm not going to get too worried about that. I'm going to put arrows on either end. So there we go. We just graphed the line using the x and y-intercept. Okay, so let's go on and look at a couple of examples. Now, I made a table before, and I like to do that table. Maybe you don't, but that's okay. I'm going to make a table, and I'm going to put a 0 in the y column and a 0 in the x column. And now I know all I have to do is find the x value that goes here and the y value that goes here. All right, so I'm going to start with finding the x value. So I'm going to make y 0. Well, hey, when I make y 0, remember it just makes the y term go away. So I could go like that if I want to and cross it off. But the only problem is I'm going to want to use that. So one thing that you can do is just remember, hey, if the y term goes away, all I have to do is solve 4x equals negative 12. And then I'm going to divide by 4. And I get x is equal to negative 3. So I'm going to plug in a negative 3 here. And then for the y-intercept, I'm going to plug in x is 0. So I could cross that off like that. And I suppose I could do it now because I don't need that anymore. But I don't like to necessarily cross things off. And I think it's fairly easy to remember. The x is just going to go away. The 4x is going to disappear. So I have 1.5y equals negative 12. And now this one you might need a calculator to do because you're dividing by 1.5, which is a decimal. And that's perfectly fine if you need a calculator. But it ends up being y equals negative 8. All right, so I can plug my negative 8 in here. And then all I have to do is go down and plot those 2 points. So I have negative 3, 0. So remember that's an x value, the negative 3 is. So it's going to be on the x-axis, so it's right there. And then the y-intercept is 0, negative 8. So it's a y value, so it's going to be down here. And one thing you'll notice as we go through these is every single point you plot will be on the x-axis and the y-axis. You won't have any that are out off in one of the corners somewhere. They'll always be on those 2 main lines with the numbers, which we call the x and y axis. All right, so all we have to do now is draw a line and hopefully make it work. Look at that. I made it work. Whoops, that's not a good arrow down there. There we go. So we graph that line using the x and y intercept. All right, let's do another one. Okay, so this one now throws a little bit of a trick at us, but nothing too terrible. But again, let's just make this table. So I put a 0 and I put a 0. I'm looking for this, I'm looking for that. And so for the first one, the y is 0, so the y term goes away. So we have 5x equals 10. And I solve for that. I divide by 5. I get x is equal to 2. So I can plug a 2 in there. And then for the second one, where we have x is equal to 0, that x term goes away. And the one thing that a lot of people are going to forget is that it's minus y. So that means it's a negative y. So I'm going to have to write negative y equals 10. But then I want to divide to get rid of that negative 1y, right? So I divide by negative 1 and get y is equal to negative 10. All right, so this is something that is going to be easy to forget, those negative signs, or the minus sign that turns into a negative sign, actually. All right, so I've got my 2 points. So now I can plot them. So the x value in the first one is 2, so that's going to go on the x-axis. The y value in the second one is negative 10, so that's going to go on the y-axis. And then I'm going to connect them. The cool thing about notability is if you draw that line and you hold on the end, it'll draw a nice straight line for you. And I missed the negative 10 a little bit, but that's okay. That's a notability thing, not my issue, right? All right. So you got a couple to do on your own. So do these 2 on your own. And when you're done with those 2, you can start the video again and we'll go through an example that, oh goodness, has decimals and fractions in it. All right, let's take a look at this one that has decimals and fractions in it. So it really, I'm just going to zoom over here like this so I can have some room to write down. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to make my table. I would always do this if I were you. And, you know, since we're using this technology, why not? You know, highlight the things that you need to find. And if you highlight on both sides of the line, then you've put the zeros in the wrong spot. So you want to make sure you have 1 0 on one side and 1 on the other. And I start with the x-intercept first and then the y-intercept, but if you wanted to go the other way, you could have it the other way too. All right. So in this case, we have a decimal, we have a fraction, but guess what? Decimals and fractions are just numbers. So there's nothing to be afraid of. So if we think about the first one, y is 0. So that means the y term is going to disappear. So the 1/4 y is going to go away. So all I have to do is solve, I don't want to write with the highlighter, that'll be bad, negative 0.2, make that point nice and obvious. There we go. Negative 0.2 x equals 4. All right, so all we have to do is grab a calculator because I'm guessing that most of you aren't going to be able to divide this in your head, and that's perfectly fine. But we're going to divide by negative 0.2. And when I divide 4 by negative 0.2, I'm going to get negative 20. You might think, why? Well, I'm dividing by a decimal, which is part of 1, right? And it's smaller than 1, so our answer is going to be bigger than 4 because we're dividing by something that's smaller than 1. So we end up with x equals negative 20. All right, so I can put that in my table. And then I can do the same thing for the second one where the x is 0. So that means the x term is going to disappear. So I'm going to have 1/4 y equals 4. And actually, you know what? This one is a little bit easier than the other one because in order to eliminate that 4, we just multiply both sides by 4. Okay, so we're eliminating the 4 in the fraction, I should say. Okay, so we end up with y equals 16. All right, so I can put my 16 in my table. And now all I have to do is plot those 2 points. So I have negative 20 on the x column. So that's my x value for my x-intercept. I'm going to have to zoom in here. Okay, and then I have 16 for my y value. So I'm going to zoom in on the 16. and make a point. Where'd it go? There it is. And then I'm going to try to connect these. Can I do it? I'm going to say it's close enough. There we go. So I just graphed that funky looking equation with decimals and fractions using the x and y intercept. Now, this one would be pretty hard to do if we had it in y equals mx plus b form. So you can see that graphing equations in standard form with decimals and fractions is actually not too bad. All right, you've got one here, just one, to do on your own. So go ahead and do that, and when you're done, make sure you enter your answers in Schoology.